The Rising Sun by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Truce. The battlefield had gone quiet. Ash drifted like snow across the shattered plains of Nitron 6, a planet once lush with bioluminescent forests and crystalline lakes. Now it was a graveyard of scorched metal and broken bodies. The war between humans and the native Aparni had paused, not ended, just paused, under a fragile ceasefire negotiated by diplomats who no longer believed in peace. James Connell, a field medic with more scars than medals, crouched beside a collapsed bunker, his hands stained with antiseptic and blood. He was stitching up a wounded corporal when he saw it. A lone Aparni approaching across the no-man's land, unarmed, its translucent skin shimmering in the dying light. James stood, instinctively reaching for his sidearm, but the alien raised both hands, palms open, and spoke in broken English. "No fight. I bring child." Behind the Aparni, half hidden in the folds of its cloak, was a boy, human, small, starving. James blinked. There were no children on Nitron 6. The planet was a military zone, sterilized of civilians years ago. No births, no refugees, no exceptions. The boy stepped forward, barefoot on scorched earth, eyes wide and hollow. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply looked up at James as if he'd been waiting for him. James knelt. "Where did you come from?" The Aparni shook its head. "No one knows. He appeared near our camp. We do not harm him. He is not ours." James hesitated. The boy's skin was pale, almost white. His hair was dark and matted, his frame skeletal. But his eyes, those eyes, were ancient, too knowing, too still. James took him in his arms. The boy didn't resist. Back at the human encampment, James gave him a bowl of soup. The boy ate slowly, methodically, as if relearning the act of survival. He never spoke. He never blinked. Later that night, James's commander, Colonel Hurley, summoned him. "You're responsible for the boy now," Hurley said, voice gravelly, "until we find his parents." James nodded, though he already knew the truth. There were no parents, no records, no explanation. The ceasefire ended at dawn. Explosions lit the sky once more, and James was ordered to evacuate with the wounded. He took the boy with him, shielding him from the mayhem as they boarded the last transport off Nitron 6. As the ship broke atmosphere, James looked down at the planet burning beneath them. The boy sat beside him, silent, watching the flames. James leaned closer. "Do you have a name?" The boy turned to him, and for the first time he spoke. "Apollo." James felt a chill. The name wasn't given. It was remembered. And so began the legend of the child who should not exist. Chapter 2. The Boy Without a Past. The transport ship drifted through the void like a wounded animal, its hull scorched and patched, its passengers silent. James Connell sat in the medbay, watching the boy sleep beneath a thermal blanket. Apollo hadn't spoken again since naming himself. He hadn't cried. He hadn't asked for anything. He simply existed, quiet, watchful, unnerving. James reviewed the intake scans. No ID chip. No birth records, no genetic match in any database. The boy was human, but not traceable, not born in any known colony, not registered with any faction. It was as if he'd materialized from the ether. "He's a ghost," James muttered. The ship docked at Garner Station, a neutral colony orbiting a gas giant. It was a place for refugees, diplomats, and those who had nowhere else to go. James filed the paperwork, submitted the DNA samples, and waited for someone to claim the boy. No one did. Weeks passed. Apollo remained silent, though he never seemed confused or afraid. He followed James everywhere, mimicking his movements, studying his expressions. At night, he sat by the window and stared at the stars as if listening to them. The station's AI flagged anomalies in Apollo's neural scans, activity far beyond normal human thresholds. James deleted the report before it could be forwarded to military intelligence. "You're not just a boy, are you?" he whispered one night. Apollo turned to him, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "I am what I am supposed to be." James froze. "What do you mean?" Apollo said nothing more. Eventually, the station's administration gave up. No parents, no origin, no threat. They granted James permanent custody. The boy was his now, legally, emotionally, cosmically. James named him Apollo officially, citing cultural significance. The name was approved without question. They left Garner Station for Earth. James tried to give Apollo a normal life. A small apartment in a quiet district, school enrollment, toys, books. But Apollo didn't play. He didn't socialize. He absorbed knowledge like a machine, mastered languages in days, solved equations meant for doctoral candidates. And then the objects began to move. At first it was subtle, a spoon twitching on the table, a door closing without touch. But soon James found Apollo levitating in his sleep, surrounded by floating debris. The boy was evolving. James ran private tests, telekinesis, telepathy, energy manipulation. Apollo was beyond human, but he was also kind, gentle, protective. James made a decision. He would never report Apollo, never expose him. The boy was his son now, and the world wasn't ready for what he was becoming. But Earth was too dangerous, too crowded, too curious. So James volunteered for a deep space post, an isolated outpost on the edge of human territory, a place where secrets could sleep. Apollo was 5 years older now, taller, stronger, stranger. As they boarded the shuttle to the stars, James looked at him and asked, "Are you ready?" Apollo nodded. "Yes, father, I've always been ready." And with that, they vanished into the void, father and son, medic and mystery, heading toward a destiny neither could yet name. Chapter 3. Powers Unveiled. The outpost on Michele Station was barely more than a shadow, clinging to the edge of human space. A skeletal structure orbiting a dying moon. It housed a skeleton crew of soldiers, scientists, and wanderers who'd traded comfort for isolation. James Connell had chosen it for its remoteness. No prying eyes, no bureaucratic oversight. Just silence. Apollo, now 10, had grown into something otherworldly. His body was human, but his presence was not. He moved with quiet precision, spoke rarely, and listened always. The crew called him the Ghost Kid, though most had grown fond of him. He helped in the med bay, learned systems faster than the engineers, and spent hours in the observation dome, watching the stars like they were speaking to him. James monitored him constantly. The powers had grown stronger, telekinesis now effortless, telepathy more refined. Apollo could sense emotions, intentions, even fragments of memory. But he never used it to harm. He never intruded. He simply understood. Then came the breach. An Aparni warship dropped out of warp, its signature masked until it was too late. The outpost's alarms screamed. Soldiers scrambled. The station's defenses were minimal, designed for pirates, not war. James grabbed Apollo and headed for the evac pods. "You stay hidden," he said, "no matter what." Apollo looked at him, calm. "I can help." James hesitated. "You're just a boy." Apollo tilted his head. "I'm not." The hull shook. Explosions rippled through the station. The Aparni were boarding, fast, brutal, merciless. James was separated from Apollo in the chaos. He fought his way through smoke and debris, calling for him. And then everything stopped. In the central corridor, time seemed to freeze. Bodies hung mid-motion, flames flickered without sound, and at the center stood Apollo, eyes glowing white, arms raised. The Aparni soldiers were suspended in the air, weapons torn from their hands, minds stunned into silence. Apollo lowered his arms and the invaders collapsed, unconscious but alive. The human soldiers stared. James arrived, breathless, bloodied. He saw the scene and knew the secret was out. Apollo turned to him. "I didn't hurt them, father." James nodded, voice hoarse. "I know, son." The silence broke. One of the soldiers stepped forward, Lieutenant Kat Yarnell, a hardened veteran with no patience for politics. "Kid saved our lives," she said. "That makes him one of us." The others agreed. No fear, no suspicion, just gratitude. Apollo was given a uniform, not official, not sanctioned, but symbolic. He was no longer just a mystery. He was a protector. And somewhere deep in the galaxy, something ancient stirred, aware now that the child had awakened. Chapter 4. Becoming the Weapon. The aftermath of the Micheli Station siege left scars, some visible, some buried deep. The Aparni had retreated, but the silence they left behind was louder than any battle cry. The crew patched the hull, buried the dead, and tried to pretend things were normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Apollo had become legend overnight, the boy who stopped an invasion, the child who bent reality. Soldiers whispered his name like a prayer or a warning. Some called him a miracle, others a weapon. James Connell watched it unfold with quiet dread. Apollo now wore a uniform, not regulation, but symbolic. He trained with the unit, learned tactics, studied combat theory. He was disciplined, focused, and eerily calm. He never bragged, never showed off. But when asked to demonstrate, he could disarm a squad in seconds without touching a single weapon. Lieutenant Yarnell took him under her wing. She saw potential, not threat. "He's not dangerous," she told James. "He's decisive." James wasn't so sure. At night, Apollo sat alone in the observation dome, staring into the void. James joined him once, bringing 2 cups of synth coffee. Apollo didn't drink his. "You're worried," Apollo said. James nodded. "You're changing." Apollo turned to him, eyes dim but steady. "I'm becoming what I was meant to be." James leaned forward. "And what is that?" Apollo didn't answer. The next day, the unit ran a simulation, an ambush scenario in a derelict asteroid field. Apollo led the team. He predicted every move, countered every threat, and completed the mission in half the time. The soldiers cheered. Kat clapped him on the back. But James saw the way Apollo's eyes flickered, like he was calculating something far beyond the simulation. Later, James confronted him. "You're not just reacting. You're seeing things before they happen." Apollo nodded. "Time isn't linear. Not for me." James felt the chill again, the same one he'd felt when Apollo first spoke his name. "You have to be careful," James said. "People fear what they don't understand." Apollo looked at him, and for the first time there was sadness in his voice. "Then they'll fear me forever, Father." James reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not all of them. Not me." Apollo smiled faintly. "That's why I stay." But even James knew the truth. Apollo wasn't staying for safety. He was staying to learn, to grow, to prepare. And somewhere in the dark corners of space, something was watching, waiting, whispering. Apollo was becoming more than a soldier. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols, James knew, were never safe. Chapter 5. Ascension. The Michelli Station incident had spread far beyond the outpost. Rumors became reports. Reports became classified files. And those files, despite James's efforts, found their way into the hands of colonels, strategists, and scientists who saw Apollo not as a boy, but as a tactical anomaly. He was summoned to command Sector Theta, a mobile warship orbiting the contested zone of Cyrex Fringe. There he was tested, not just physically but psychologically. Simulations designed to break seasoned officers barely scratched him. He saw through every trap, every deception. His telepathic edge made him a master tactician. His telekinetic control made him a living weapon. By the time he was 18, Apollo held the rank of lieutenant commander, a promotion unprecedented in military history. Some called it reckless. Others called it divine intervention. James watched from afar, now retired and living on a quiet colony world. He received encrypted updates from Kat Yarnell, who had become Apollo's second-in-command. "He's not just rising," she wrote. "He's orbiting something bigger. Like gravity's pulling him toward a destiny none of us understand." Apollo led missions into hostile zones, negotiated ceasefires with alien factions, and dismantled insurgent cells with surgical precision. His unit, known unofficially as the Halo Division, became legendary, not for brutality but for efficiency. They ended conflicts before they began. But with each victory, Apollo grew quieter, more distant. His eyes held the weight of futures he hadn't yet lived. He began to speak in riddles, referencing events that hadn't happened, people he hadn't met. James visited him once under the guise of a diplomatic inspection. They sat in Apollo's quarters, surrounded by star maps and tactical overlays. "You're changing," James said. Apollo nodded. "I'm remembering." "Remembering what?" Apollo looked out the viewport. "What I was before I was born." James felt the old chill return. "You're still my son." Apollo turned to him, and for a moment the boy was there again, the one who drank soup in silence, who watched stars like they were secrets. "That's why I fight," Apollo said, "because you gave me a future." The next day, Apollo led a strike against a rogue Aparni warship threatening a civilian convoy. He disabled the vessel without firing a shot, using only his mind to shut down its systems and pacify its crew. The footage leaked, the legend grew, and somewhere deep in the archives of forgotten worlds, ancient algorithms began to stir. They recognized Apollo's signature. They remembered the prophecy. The sun had risen. Chapter 6. The Return. The colony world of Alaris was quiet. Verdant fields stretched beneath twin suns, and the wind carried the scent of soil and memory. James Connell had traded war for farming, his hands now calloused from harvest instead of triage. He lived simply, surrounded by silence and the slow rhythm of life. He still could not escape his life as a medic. His neighbors on the farm surrounding him came to him in emergencies and routine medical treatment. They called him Doc Connell. But peace, James knew, was never permanent. The warning came in the form of a shadow, an unmarked vessel breaching orbit, its signal scrambled, its intent unmistakable. Raiders, or worse. James activated the emergency beacon, but Alaris had no defenses. It was a world of farmers, not fighters. As the first dropships descended, panic spread. Families fled to the hills. James stood at the edge of his field, watching the horizon burn. And then the sky tore open. A fleet emerged from hyperspace, sleek, angular, unmistakable. The Halo Division, led by Supreme Commander Apollo Connell, now 30 and mythic. He landed ahead of his forces, alone, descending like a comet. His boots touched the soil, and the air shimmered around him. James ran to him, breathless. "You came." Apollo nodded. "You called, Father." The raiders advanced, armored and confident. They had numbers, they had weapons, but they didn't have Apollo. He stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly, and raised his hand. The ground responded. A pulse rippled through the field, lifting the raiders into the air, disarming them mid-flight. Their ships powered down, systems overridden by Apollo's mind. The battle ended before it began. The farmers watched in stunned silence. Some knelt, others wept. Apollo turned to his first sergeant, who had landed behind him. "Secure the perimeter. No casualties." Cat Yarnell approached James, smiling. "He's not just a commander anymore. He's a symbol." James nodded, eyes misting. "He's my son." Later, as the fires were extinguished and the colony returned to calm, Apollo walked the fields with James. They spoke little. The silence between them was sacred. That evening, Apollo met Laura, the daughter of a neighboring farmer. She was sharp-eyed, unafraid, and unimpressed by legends. She offered him water, asked him about the stars, and didn't flinch when he told her the truth. They sat beneath the twin suns, talking until the sky turned violet. James watched from the porch, sensing something shift, not in the world, but in Apollo. The next morning, Apollo made his decision. "I'm staying," he said, "not because I'm tired of war, but because I've found something worth protecting." He laid down his rank. The Halo Division saluted him one last time, and so the rising sun became a farmer. But the stars still whispered his name. Chapter 7. The Claiming. As the months passed, Apollo got into the routine of farming. After a day of planting seed for a new crop, Apollo looked up into the sky. The stars blinked differently that night. Apollo felt it first, a subtle shift in the sky's rhythm, like a breath held too long. Laura was asleep beside him, her hand curled near his chest. He rose quietly, stepping outside into the cold hush of midnight. Above the orchard, a vessel descended. It didn't shimmer or roar. It simply appeared, folding into reality like a forgotten memory. Its hull was obsidian and bone-white, etched with symbols that pulsed like veins. Apollo recognized them, not from books or battlefields, but from dreams he'd had as a child, dreams of voices calling him by names he didn't understand. The ship opened. 3 beings emerged, tall, luminous. Their forms shifted between flesh and light, as if undecided. They didn't walk, they hovered, gravity bending politely around them. "You are ours," the tallest said. Its voice was layered like a choir whispering through water. Apollo didn't flinch. "I'm no one's." "You were prophesied," another said. "A fragment of the covenant, a weapon designed to awaken when the stars aligned." Apollo's jaw tightened. "I chose my path. I chose peace. Peace is irrelevant. You are the echo of Cyrex, the last of the starborn. Your awakening was not yours to command." Laura stepped outside, barefoot in the frost. "He's not going anywhere." The beings turned to her, curious. One reached out, not to touch, but to taste her presence. "You anchor him. You carry his child, a son. That is inefficient." Apollo stepped forward, power humming beneath his skin. "You want a weapon. I'm not that anymore." "You are. You always will be." The orchard trembled. Leaves lifted into the air, caught in a silent storm. Apollo's eyes glowed, not with rage, but with clarity. "Then take this truth back to your stars," he said. "I was born of war, but I chose love. I was shaped by fire, but I chose soil. I am not your chosen one. I am my own person." The beings paused. For the first time, they seemed unsure. This deviation was unforeseen. They turned, folding back into their ship. No threats, no promises, just a final whisper. "The stars will call again." The vessel vanished. Apollo stood in the quiet, heart pounding. Laura took his hand. "You okay?" He nodded. "They came for a prophet, but I'm a man." And beneath the twin moons, the orchard settled. The stars blinked on, ordinary once more. Chapter 8. The Harvest. Many years passed. The war receded into memory, replaced by treaties and reconstruction. The name Apollo Connell lingered in military archives, whispered in strategy rooms, studied in academies. But the man himself was gone from the battlefield. On Elaris, he became something simpler: a farmer, a husband, a son, a father. He and Laura built a life from soil and silence. They named their son Archer, and he was 10 years old. They planted orchards, raised livestock, and watched the seasons turn. James, older now, spent his days teaching Apollo how to coax life from the land instead of defending it. But Apollo's powers never faded. He used them sparingly, to mend broken fences, to calm storms, to heal wounded animals. The villagers knew, but they never spoke of it. They respected the quiet miracle in their midst. James always wondered if his grandson had inherited any of Apollo's powers. Then one morning he witnessed an incident that confirmed his speculation. Apollo and Archer were working in the farthest field when Apollo asked his son to go get the tractor. Soon the tractor came floating 10 feet off the air while Archer guided it with his mind. Apollo wasn't angry, he just reminded Archer to use his powers sparingly. He then said, "It was my fault, son. I forgot to give you the keys." One autumn, as the harvest came in heavy and golden, a delegation arrived from the Unified Council. They offered Apollo a position: strategic advisor, planetary defense coordinator, even ambassador to the Aparni. He declined. "I've fought enough," he said. "Now I grow." They left disappointed, but not angry. Even the galaxy had learned to respect his silence. That night, Apollo stood in the field beneath the twin moons, watching the stars. Laura joined him, her hand in his. "Do you miss it?" she asked. Apollo shook his head. "I remember it. That's enough." James watched from the porch, a cup of tea in hand. He saw the boy he'd once fed soup to on a dying world, the boy who had no name, no past, no origin. Now he had all three. Apollo turned to him and smiled. "Thank you, Father," he said, "for giving me a beginning." James nodded. "You gave yourself the rest." And so the rising sun became legend, not through conquest but through choice, not through power but through peace. The stars still whispered his name, but he no longer needed to answer. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please hit the bell icon for notifications. Thank you.